All right, happy Wednesday. What is going on, fellow men and first responders out there? I do every Wednesday, I do a training. And this Wednesday, I want to talk about identity. And I think why it's a crucial piece in the puzzle when we're looking at forming better relationships with our wives or our kids. And it's a constant thing that I see a lot of first responder men and just men in general talk about is their identity. And I think when you start to lock this piece of the puzzle into your life, you're going to see a ton of change. And so, in the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to shoot a quick video. I'm going to go over the 7 steps of how you can start to reclaim your identity. And I think when you do, you're going to see a lot of powerful changes start to transcend in your own family. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Joel Evan. I was a first responder. I was a police officer for almost 15 years. And I know what it's like to be stressed out, work shift work, have low staffing issues, have to work lots of overtime because, you have kids. I have 2 kids and I've been married for 11 years. And so my wife hasn't worked in 11 years. I've been, I had to take on more work. And so I completely get it. And I was also in a space where I thought marriage sucked. I thought marriage probably for a good 9 years or so. I thought marriage, I didn't even know if it could be successful. And I realized through all my training and everything that I've done, from certifications to hiring multiple coaches, that I realized, oh, I get it now. Like, marriage is actually awesome, and it can be awesome for all of you if you understand some of these things. And that's really what I want to share, because I know now that it's possible, and that lights me up, because then I know I can help other people, because I know the process that I went through, and it took me 10 years to figure out. I don't want you to have to go through that same pain and agony. And so here's just one of the things that I've learned is this idea about identity and reclaiming it. And so the last thing I'll say before I jump in is, if you're a first responder man and you want to level up your marriage or build more connection with your kids, you're a father like me, reach out to me, shoot me a message or comment below, and just jump in my free first responders Facebook group. I'd love to have you in. And that's just a place where we can all start doing a little bit of men's work and up leveling each other. Having that accountability is so key. And I know that was part of my transformation, was doing that work. So let's talk about identity just really quick. Why is it such a huge issue? Well, I think for a lot of us, especially first responders, right? I know, had being a police officer for almost 15 years, like the sense of your job and that role that you play as a police officer, people even start to say things like, I'm a cop. Like, that became like a thing I would say especially in the early years. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a cop. Not only was I a cop, I was a cop in one of the top 5 most dangerous cities in the world. So I even felt like another extra sense of pride. And like, people would ask me questions at parties and they couldn't believe the stories I was telling them. And so that even gave me all this other pride, and, just being proud of myself, like, oh yeah, I matter. And maybe in my life, I didn't think I mattered as much. And this gave me like power. Like, I felt good about myself and the job that I was doing. Right. The problem we see is when these identities, though, when it becomes inseparable. Right. And the reason that is an issue is because your life as a police officer, for example, is all about control. And when you're in control, you feel good, you feel secure. Well, what happens when you're not in control? Like in your family life or your personal life or your marriage, or your kids aren't listening, you don't feel in control, you get triggered, and you're like, you can't talk to me that way. You can't do these things. And that makes you feel helpless. It makes you feel out of control. When you're out of control, usually what happens is you get triggered and you start doing things like becoming angry or yelling, or maybe you can become passive aggressive. That was a trait I would take on. I would become passive aggressive or distant or isolated. And because, again, that's your identities. I have to be in control, right? Well, here's the interesting thing. Think about when you don't feel like you're in control, what kind of person is that? I'm going to tell you, that kind of person is a victim. And I don't think any of you would want to say, oh yeah, that's me, I'm a victim. Like, we think of that as, oh, that's like victims on the street. Like, they get mugged. That would never happen to me. Well, if you're walking around with this helpless attitude because you're unable to control anything, now you become a victim. And that's that victim mentality. You enter victimhood. So you don't want to do that. Right. And the fact of the matter is, we all have a choice of how we're going to respond. Every moment of every day, you do control your personal life, whether you believe it or not. Maybe sometimes you feel like you don't. Like, the job sucks. They're doing this. The department's doing this. The chief's doing this. My wife's doing this. My kids are doing this. I can't control that. Yeah, you can. I'm telling you, you can. Believe me. It seems crazy to say that, but you do control your personal life. You're always making choices. You have a choice to be happy. You have a choice to be sad. So Let's talk about it though. Here's 7 ways you can start reclaiming your identity. And it's going to be, especially, again, the longer you've been in the game, if you're a first responder, you know how that identity can affect and can be more difficult. So the first one is this: it's got to challenge your limiting beliefs and identity. Like when your wife gets angry, for example, like I know for me, when my wife gets angry, I automatically get angry. And sometimes I shut down. For other guys, it's like a matter of life and death, right? And they get triggered. Now, as a kid, I knew if my parents got angry, I knew not to rebel against them. I knew that I was not allowed to express my emotions. It wasn't okay. So a limiting belief for me is, in my identity, is it's not okay to express emotions. Matter of fact, you seem out of control and you're not very professional when you do and you get angry and you raise your voice. I think that's ridiculous. That's a belief that I have. And so I established that in my identity of like, oh, I'm not going to react that way. And there's a part about being calm and cool and collected when maybe your wife's bringing the fire, you bring the water. I think there's some good to that. But that could be one of your limiting beliefs. So just understand that. And look at those and challenge those and ask yourself, like, are those real? Do those really add up? And why am I living into these beliefs? And a lot of times our beliefs are shaped by our religion, the way we were raised, childhood, maybe trauma. And so you got to start challenging those and your identity. The second step is this: you want to understand, where was that key decision in your life? Probably as a child, there was something, and we all made choices. I probably made choices not to be vulnerable, right? Because why? Because that's weak. Men were taught like that's weak. You don't show your emotions. And especially in my household, it wasn't okay to share emotions. And so I learned, like, sharing emotions, you don't get to survive. Like that's not okay. And so as part of a survival mechanism, I learned, like, oh, I'm safe if I don't share my emotions. Like that's actually a good quality. And it probably made me a great quality to be a cop later on, because now I was able to detach from emotional situations pretty easily. Some people can't. What about like not being scared, not being fearful, right? We take on these beliefs. Why? Because that's weak. And so we start to take on this identity because as a kid, we're just trying to survive and we're just trying to preserve ourselves. But then that acts out in adulthood. So every time that you get angry or depressed or you're feeling helpless, believe it or not, like, you're subconsciously gaining something by doing this pattern and repeating it. And that's why you keep doing it. And I'm telling you right now, it's really going to be critical for your growth to start to examine that. Go deep on that. Why do you do that? Because the only way you're going to develop your true capacity is if you go deep. Okay. The third thing is, oh, that's the wrong one. This is an old one, but I'm going to rewrite it right now. This is how you do things on the fly when you're going live. You want to connect to the consequences of your key decisions. Pretty obvious, right? So you want to figure out, like, what are the repercussions? Like, what's not good about this, right? Who does not benefit? Most likely your kids and your wife are not benefiting from that. So connect to those consequences and see how your actions right now and how you're showing up affects others, most likely your wife and your kids, right? That's a big one. Number four is, you got to commit to change. It sounds easy. Everybody knows it. Of course, Joel, yeah, I need to commit. Well, there's a difference when you go all in on something. I'm telling you. I know when there was things when I was just dabbling in my life and just reading a book here or learning something at a seminar and bringing some of it back. But guess what? When you go all in, that's a different mentality. That's like that Mamba mentality. That's like that Kobe Bryant mentality. There's a different animal when someone who goes all in. You feel that. You feel that energy. Guys, I'm telling you, you want to commit to changing your relationship, you got to go all in. That's what I did. And that changed everything. The other thing, a part of that, the piece of this is, you got to take extreme ownership. Like, and that goes back to that Jocko Willink book. Everybody knows it now, Extreme Ownership. But think about that: extreme ownership, radical, ruthless responsibility. Like, everything that happens on my team, my marriage, my kids, my fault, because I'm the leader and I'm not stepping up right. And that's why they're not getting successful, because I'm not doing enough. When you start putting it back on you, like, what else can I be doing? I'm telling you, man, you start zooming out of and stop focusing on you, like, oh, I'm such the problem. What do I do? No, when you start looking out and thinking like problem oriented, solution oriented, man, things are going to unlock. But you got to commit and you got to decide. You got to cut off the past and move forward. So commit to change. It's so, so powerful. 5, you got to build up those emotional resources. So what do I mean by that? Well, Do one thing that do a small thing, by the way. Always start small. Do a small thing that contradicts maybe some of the key decisions from your past. So if you've always been, I don't know, afraid to show your emotions to your wife or be vulnerable, right? Well, let her see them now. I can tell you for me, one of my biggest problems is I think I'm a fun guy. Like I do well with like my friends and yo, Joel, you're funny and all these things. But when I'm at home, I'm like super serious and I treat my kids like do this, do that. And like, I want to see them succeed and be well. And so I try to like instill positive things in them, but I'm not funny. I'm not humorous them. I'm not the fun guy. And one of my kids is like, they're both, but one of them is like very like out there, just always like, free attitude and long hair, don't care. And just the opposite of like my kind of general attitude. And I'm more serious. And so I'm not the fun guy. And he's always like fun and wanting to play. Every time, guys, I tell you, every time that I'm fun with him and I bring humor into the situation, and the same thing is true with my wife. Anytime like there's friction between us, if I bring humor into it and lightness, everybody starts to relax. It brings everybody back into ease. Their nervous system starts to relax and everybody starts to change. So do something that you normally wouldn't do. And that's really hard to do. You got to start repatterning it. And the only way you're going to do it is by trying something new. Because guess what? The things that got you here aren't going to get you there, right? You want to go somewhere else, but you're doing the same stuff. That's what that Einstein quote, that's the definition of insanity. All right, last two, we're going to wrap this up. 6, you got to strategize ways to reclaim your identity. And what do I mean? You got to make a plan. Like you got to have A, B, C, D. This is what I'm going to start doing. Like, what are the new habits that I'm going to start committing to instituting in my family? And again, always make these small, but what are the things I'm going to start doing daily that is going to start radically impacting my family? And if I start to do these, man, that's going to change the identity and the relationship that I have with them. And one thing could just be, doing some small acts of service for your wife daily, right? Or say something every day. I'm going to wake up and I'm going to say something positive to my kids. Because most of the time I just tell them, do this, do that, get your clothes ready, get their dishes done. Da, da, da. Like, no, today I'm going to say, man, I love you. Or man, thanks for doing the dishes, or, like do something different. Right. So that's going to be a great way, but you got to make a plan. And if you don't stick to the plan and you come back a week and I'm like, hey, how'd it go? You're like, oh, I don't know. It went okay. Well, what'd you do? Well, I did it for one day, but I didn't do anything the next day. Yeah. Make a plan, commit to that, see what happens. All right. Last step, number 7, take action, visualize the results. I think some of you will say, come on, man, visualize the results. I can tell you there's so many countless stories of visualization. And there's like that famous free throw study done out of Chicago University where they had one group just shoot three throws for 2 weeks and actually practice. And another group, all they did was visualize making the free throws. And the difference between the two was literally 1%. Their accuracy improved by, I believe, 23%. The group that visualized, never practiced, never picked up a ball, it improved by 22%. So it's like, that's how powerful visualization does, because you start to really reprogram the subconscious. And I was never into visualization, and it's something that's really transformed my life in the last couple of years. So visualize and imagine, like I have to do that because again, I'm walking around with an old identity. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. I need to get better and be more successful and do all these things. Well, where's my family playing that? Am I visualizing how I'm going to be a great dad today? Am I visualizing how I'm going to be present today? Because that's something I'm not good at, being present. Am I going to visualize like, oh, when my kid does this today and he overreacts, this is how I'm going to show up, right? Like start visualizing and imagine like when this happens, this is how I'm going to show up. Man, that is a game changer, guys. I mean, if you just do one of the 7, and I'll just recap them for you, right? Which is challenge your limiting beliefs and identity, discover and understand those key decisions that affect who you are now, connect to your consequences, right? How are they affecting your family negatively? Committing to that change, which we know, get those emotional resources built up, do something contradictory to what you normally do. 6, strategize, make a plan. And then 7, take action, visualize, rinse and repeat. I hope this was helpful, man. I know this is a big one for a lot of guys. I went a little longer than the 10 minutes that I thought, but I know it's going to be valuable. So again, if you are a male, a first responder, and you need help and you want to take your family and your marriage to the next level, I know what it takes. I feel like I've cracked the code in it per se, because I've done it. I went through the pain that everybody had to go through. And I mean, there's just such an easier route, and I know how to get you there. So if you need help, drop me a line. Always happy to connect with everybody and just up level you in any way I can, or just jump in my first responder Facebook group. It's totally free. And there's a lot of good guys doing some good work in there. So I hope this was great, guys. Have an amazing rest of your week.